Welcome to Netsmart Care Threads, a podcast where human services and post-acute leaders across the healthcare continuum come together to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities. Listen as we uncover real stories about how to innovate and improve the quality of care for the communities we serve. Let's get into the show.
My name is Mike Dordick. I am the president of McBee as well as SVP of Post-Acute Strategy for Netsmart. And I'm joined by an esteemed colleague that I've worked with for a number of years as a member of the HHFMA, part of the National Association for Home Care and Hospice, Bill Dombi. Bill, for those of you who don't know him, most of you I'm sure do, has been involved in every major decision that's taken place in home health as the president of National Association for Home Care and Hospice, is an expert in healthcare policy and law, and is involved very heavily in the industry and making sure that we protect the benefits in both home care and hospice. So we're going to talk about the current environment, then challenges and opportunities. We're also going to go into what's changing on a policy and legislative front. There's a lot happening in DC right now, and there's a lot of information that's coming back and forth on the home care and hospice world. We're going to talk about a path forward to what would the future look like. And then the final takeaways. We know since we've been in the COVID world, a couple of years now, workforce has been the biggest issue. You've seen a scenario that took place before where prior to COVID, we all had scenarios where you had the workforce and you were fighting for referrals. Now, not every patient's being seen. So we have a huge issue that we're trying to fight through. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Well, yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity to come here with you all. What I wanted to do is kind of cover, what I would call mega trends that we're seeing in healthcare services at home to set the table for the discussion that Mike and I will have. What's the biggest challenge? Workforce. We are absolutely showing that home care employers are committed to take and support all necessary actions. So the reason why we have issues of shortage in workforce is not because of the way employers have acted, very, very supportive of the workers. But what we really need to be looking at is a multidimensional, integrated focus in terms of bringing about solutions to this. Yes, compensation is in the midst of all of that, and home care is competing with every other healthcare provider out there. Home care aides, for example, still undervalued when it comes to compensation. But the workforce is looking for more than just compensation. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for career opportunities. They're looking to find ways to support their biggest partner in the home, family caregivers. And absolutely, we need some more supports around technologies to maximize productivity. Technologies is an incredibly valuable tool. Beyond the megatrend on workforce, recognize managed care is growing. Joe Namath and Jimmy Walker and Bill Shatner have all had some success in recruiting people to join the Medicare Advantage plan over traditional Medicare. We're continuing to see the proportion of traditional Medicare patients in home care shrink as the Medicare Advantage population grows. Are we prepared for that? Absolutely affects reimbursement, but does create opportunities as well. One example, early stages of the pandemic. It was managed care who came out with ways of reimbursing home health agencies for virtual visits. So the value proposition with managed care, and in particular with Medicare Advantage, that ultimately drives the action. So we have to be there preparing to present that value proposition. While we want to be innovative, we want to look to the future, we do have to keep our eyes on the road. And yes, in 2023, we continue to face rate cuts in Medicare home health services. Medicaid was threatened with changes to the cap calculation. Parties are starting to look at whether the models of reimbursement fit. The uniform post-acute care payment model is still in the mix. So a lot to be watching for in terms of those kinds of challenges. Now, where will we be in a megatrend for Congress? We've seen the House of Representatives flip from a Democrat-controlled to a Republican-controlled, leading to entirely new leadership relative to both the House at large, as well as within the committees of jurisdiction. Does that spell gridlock? Or let's hope for something different. Does that spell a better opportunity for bipartisanship? We like the bipartisanship side because we have friends on both sides of the aisle. We need them on both sides. And then our dear friends at the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, or as some of us have relabeled it, the Medicare Payment Reduction Commission. MedPAC needs to modernize its thinking. It needs to be looking at the economic models that home healthcare, hospice, and other healthcare providers actually operate in. There are great opportunities as well, though, and I know that you've got your finger on the button with technology. Home care, honestly, has led healthcare in terms of technological advancements and adoption, and technologies will continue. I have this hope, and I hope in earnest, that sometime in my lifetime, we see our version of Star Wars or Star Trek or even the Terminator, that we have the Carinator model of androids and robots rather than the Terminator model of that. So I don't see a ceiling to technology out there in terms of it, and investment will be made in that. And then we need to do something that's way overdue, and opportunities that's particularly there for healthcare at home, both in hospice as well as home health, and that's palliative care. It is essential that we develop palliative care programs, but benefits to support those programs under Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance as well. And then the other great opportunity that's out there has been driven by your success, breaking down that continuum of care where it's not setting specific, it is level of care, patient needs specific now. So we may find ourselves, and this is part of the forecast, where the demand for services in the home rises, and you're going to be making some tough decisions that are budgeting your limited staff. That brings in healthcare ethics as well as business elements of it. We hope we're not there, but be prepared to think of budgeting limited services. So ultimately, one thing that will contribute to the high demand is as payers embrace you, they will be looking for high quality and low price. Not a surprise. That's economics 101. You want the best product or service at the best possible price you can get. So be prepared with the data necessary to be able to prove your value along the way.
Lots of great information. Again, we have a scary outlook in some ways and a great outlook in others with the opportunities that are out there. But I'm going to start with the question that, Bill, you and I were talking about ahead of time, with the scenarios of the number of enrollees in Medicare are growing, but really they're growing in managed care. Why is that happening? You have to think about the population that's getting to Medicare age now was used to managed care, whereas the 10, 15 years ago would have been it was traditional Medicare, and that's what they went into. So if you're used to an HMO plan or a managed care plan, it's a lot easier for when you see those TV commercials with William Shatner and other people advertising for all the great things you get from managed care. It's a different world of the population coming into right now. So I think that's what you have to think about.
Well, there's no doubt marketing has affected Medicare Advantage enrollment, but so has the ability of the plans to offer services beyond what the traditional Medicare program offers. You can't really know a Medicare Advantage plan until you see how it operates. I still think we need a very cautious eye to Medicare Advantage plans, at least as they've related to home care services. We have not seen the kind of utilization, overall management, and certainly their pricing that they offer to the providers of the services are not financially sustainable for the programs. But the reason we're seeing the growth is not just simply coming from marketings of the plans. Policy people, members of Congress, and regulators are also very much promoting it, and it's not party specific. It's not Democrats promoting it over Republicans or Republicans over Democrats. There is a strong sentiment, of privatizing the Medicare program and offering it through managed care plans. Although somewhat the bloom may be off the rose, and some of the people who've long-standing proponents for Medicare Advantage plans are taking a closer look at how they're operating. The Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, they displayed that the plans the cost for having people enroll in the plans is greater than the cost it would be to care for those same people in the traditional Medicare program. 106% of that cost in an aggregate sense. So, but the future at the moment is not a runaway train, but it's moving under a full head of steam.
Yeah, it's moving very quickly. But when you think about workforce pressures, we talk about relief. Is a relief coming? What's the change in the labor market? I don't know if you had some thoughts related to what we may see happening related to workforce.
Well, let me start with what we see happening in Washington to provide supports. There has been legislation that has been pending, but little has passed so far that would have created additional payments to the state Medicaid programs on home and community-based services, with the primary goal to increase compensation to stabilize the workforce that's there, because so many of those workers, caregivers are getting $12, $13, $14 an hour, when fast food places are paying more than that, and retail outlets are paying even more than that. So compensation being addressed in that respect. But there's some additional legislative actions that are ongoing that would create a good strategic foundation for dealing with fixing the workforce needs today and building a better system so that they are not in crisis once again going forward. And it's not always just home care that we're talking about, but everything, including the education system. Outside of Washington, when we look at the education system from a home care kind of vantage point, we are seeing some developments where schools of nursing are training individuals to be able to graduate and go right into the home care field. But that requires a lot of change in their educational formatting to do that, because working independently in the home is a lot different than working under the structures that a hospital or a nursing facility may offer. And then there is work underway to kind of clean up the backlog of people seeking work visas to come into the country. We have nurses, from the Philippines and from other parts of the country, of the world, going to France and Germany, but they really want to come into the United States instead to help provide services here. So we've got a multi-dimensional kind of set of actions underway. I'm not sure I see pixie dust out there in any way in order to make a sudden change in our workforce circumstance.
And we're looking at payment cuts. And there's scenarios where in certain areas of the country, especially, I think we're going to start seeing home health deserts, where I'll call areas that are more rural. The agencies that work in those areas right now may not be able to do that because there aren't enough patients in a geographic area for a clinician to see them. So, but when you think about what MedPAC's looking at, and what, besides them looking at the profits that keep getting reported, we keep seeing this constant word of cut. And we see this scenario of this data they're looking at where they're saying that the industry is making too much money, but in a lot of ways, that's going to hurt us in workforce. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, the workforce and the payment rates are certainly intertwined. If you cut money, it makes it harder to, recruit the workforce. As much as they want meaningful work and they like the flexibility, you still have to put bread on the table. So I am concerned about these rate cuts, very significantly concerned, not just for the businesses themselves, but what we have seen over the last 10 plus years now is that rate cuts in home health care have triggered service cuts to patients. It also creates a slippery slope. As providers reduce the services needing to do so to just survive, then somebody comes along and says, well, your costs are lower now, so we're going to reduce the rates even further, rebase the rates to your current kind of cost. So we really do need a revolution relative to the payment rate approaches, particularly by these government programs. When you see a subsidy coming from the traditional Medicare home health benefit to Medicare Advantage and Medicaid, you have to ask yourself the question, how could this be happening when CMS is effectively sanctioning what the plans are doing in order to access care and what Medicaid programs are doing too? How could they be doing it with blinders on to see that these plans are paying less than cost? Medicaid program historically always less than cost. It's like a three-legged stool, and you start weakening that leg that supports Medicare home health right now, and the whole thing is likely to collapse. But it also obviously tied to the compensation issues relative to the workforce. People do need to recognize, though, one other thing is that it's not because they undervalue home health care or hospice services. They just feel that as the largest purchaser of the services, they shouldn't be paying the premium price, or for that matter, paying a price that subsidizes other payers. The problem being, I don't know of a single home health agency that has leverage over a managed care plan to demand higher payment rates and actually get them. And certainly deaf ears are there routinely in state Medicaid programs when it comes to payment rates.
Yeah, and Bill, I think you hit it as a critical issue. And again, when you think about managed care, the challenge becomes is that the industry as a whole has not been aggressive enough with the managed care plans. We've just taken it because it's been subsidized by the Medicare reimbursement. And when we go through that process, until a group of providers, and again, you can call it whether you think it's banning against or unfair trade, there have been markets where a group of providers go back to a managed care plan and said, we're all going to drop out unless you do something. As long as there's one provider or a group of providers that have enough clinicians to see patients, and they will take the patients, we're going to always have that issue. But the question then becomes, how do you survive as an organization if the rates keep going down and we move things across? So ultimately, we move volume goes from traditional Medicare to Medicare Advantage. I mean, we could spend lots of time there.
Yeah, and what's happening, I mean, the anti-trade law, for fair relations between buyer and sellers goes both ways, but we've got independent home care companies who can't band together to boycott the managed care plans, so they can't collude with each other to say, we want the price to go higher. That will violate the antitrust laws. But in a pure economic approach, there is no way that a single provider of services on their own have the leverage necessary to negotiate a better payment rate. So that's why in 2023, we're going to be bringing this issue out right in the forefront, and even turning to Congress and the regulators and saying, this is not good for you, and it's not good for patients, and it's certainly not good for the providers of the services. We need some help in trying to figure out how to fix this, and maybe the managed care plans won't like what the fix is. I'm not sure exactly what the fix could be, but something has to change, or the future, is problematic. And I think we've got some good support in Congress, and I know we have it among regulators as well.
Bill, with the new Congress, with the Republican majority in the House, and we talk about what's actually happening in MedPAC, what do you see happening next? Obviously, when we're into 2023, as we move through the year and we look toward what they've said are going to be rate cuts, how do you think that plays out in the Congress right now?
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of forces in play that's healthcare related in this. We can't ignore the fact that the Medicare Trust Fund is in a pretty shaky circumstance right now. We can't ignore the fact that Medicaid is either number one or number two in state budget spending, and so you are going to, continue to look at such things as recession risks and what that does for tax dollars, because tax dollars are used for both Medicaid and the Medicare program. But people will be looking at those programs in terms of where their future. Ultimately, I still see a pretty positive environment favoring healthcare supports, particularly in an aging country as we have. Not in your age category, Mike, but certainly in mine. We will have the strongest, wealthiest, most populated sector of the age demographics in the U.S., and we're the ones who will be needing healthcare services as we age. But when we're looking at that, we can't ignore that with the new Congress as to who's going to chair the Health Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee. A Republican naturally being in there, Vern Buchanan. Congressman Buchanan was the lead sponsor from the Republican side of our PDGM rescue legislation. So he's there understanding where our needs are right from the get-go on that. Senator Debbie Stabenow from the Senate Health Subcommittee, Senate Finance Health Subcommittee, announced her retirement, but she is still going to be there for 2 years for us in a very leading position, obviously, on healthcare related services. And we already know from talking to Senator Stabenow and to Congressman Buchanan, they are quite willing to cross the aisle over to the other party, to form the right coalitions to make things happen. That may sound a very positive view of things, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, to get there. So I think healthcare is going to be one of the big issues for this Congress over the next 4 years for the reasons that I mentioned on the trust fund and more.
Bill, we've talked a bunch about home health and home care, but when you think about hospice and how what's going to play out with VBID and especially some of the legislation that's out there and our early conversations related to managed care. I mean, that will change, and managed care will have a lot more flexibility in VBID. I mean, ultimately the hospice benefit, the way it is today, it's all traditional Medicare, except for maybe some commercial plans that are not aged over 65. And those plans have a lot of rigid processes, and obviously the managed care plans have more flexibility. How is it looked at in Congress right now, and where do you see the VBID direction going?
Well, let me start with hospice in a more general sense, okay? And I hope the hospices listening in take this the right way. Well, hospice has had a pretty cushy ride, up until just recently. With great warrant, they've had that ride. And when I say cushy, it's in comparison to the way the Medicare program deals with other providers of services and other payers deal with other providers of services. We're going to do everything we can to keep that ride as cushy as possible. But we are absolutely seeing signs with hospice that include VBID as a consideration, indicating that we have an extremely different world facing us going forward. The signs are out there that hospice is in for a new generation, and hospices need to prepare for that. And I'm going to suggest, whether it be for VBID related or otherwise, one of the first steps hospices should be taking right now is to examine all of their own processes and their documentation of performance within the processes in order to perfect the support for a claim, to demonstrate high quality services, and then to support also the efficiencies that are there. But there are so many good things about hospice that remain out there. It is embraced by the American population. 1 out of every 2 people enrolled in Medicare that die in a year have used hospice in the previous 12 months. That is absolutely remarkable, and there's still room for more. People who elect hospice on a more timely basis, and even people with long stays, save the Medicare program money. So where does that all go? We have this bump in the road. It might be an opportunity too, but let's look at it from the bump side of Medicare Advantage getting into the hospice side of work too. Too early to tell whether VBID will be expanded. The take up on it by managed care plans has been limited so far. And I think a lot of people in managed care are looking at what's happening with respect to that. So the job that we all have is to make sure that when managed care does this, to the extent that they're going to do it, they need to do it right. And we have our concerns whether or not they're doing it right already. And so that we're conveying those to CMS. If you were a betting person at this point, yes, the train left the station relative to the VBID program. And if the plans want it, the plans probably will get their way. We just hope that if that happens, that we're also successful in making sure the plans understand the value of hospice and why hospice has to stay in the concept that it is an interdisciplinary team, responsible for a bundle of care needs for the patient rather than parceling it out to try to get a cheaper price for this and for that within the service, and that it has to be absolutely patient-centered as well. I mean, it is a wonderful benefit. We did not support VBID. We still do not support VBID. We look at hospice and we say it has proven itself to be the most innovative part of the Medicare program. Build around that rather than shift it over to somebody else to add another layer into the mix. So again, if we had our druthers at this point, we would not see the VBID expand. Short of that, we want to make sure the VBID program does not dilute or even destroy the hospice benefit. It deserves our full protection.
Let's go into value-based purchasing. I mean, right now it's live in all of home health. I think we can expect to see it in other areas of healthcare. So let's talk about expansion of value-based purchasing. What you see happening there.
Well, here's the best part of value-based purchasing. The home health demonstration program was one of the very few VBP programs that actually brought value. And my most positive explanation on that was the VBP program absolutely demonstrated that home health brings dynamic value, meaning it avoids costly hospitalizations, it avoids urgent care. So it's not all about one home health being better than another in terms of efficiently providing care in the home setting. It's all about the effect that follows those kinds of things. And I think, we're seeing that CMS has recognized that you don't need to put a lot at risk to get quality care results. So I see them full bore continuing the value-based program nationally, but we need to watch it. I mean, the national program is different than 9 separate state-located VBP programs. Oregon's competing with Mississippi, and Florida's competing with Connecticut, et cetera, relative to this program. But providers of services demonstrated in the 9 states that they can do better than they were doing without VBP, and they can do it without being highly disruptive.
Where do we see some of the regulatory pieces related to PDGM, the rate cuts that are out there, and our legislative efforts, both from the National Association for Home Care and Hospice and other outlets as we go through this year?
Well, I mean, there are, it's full force, full army, full armor, to try to deal with PDGM. We will be taking a different tact this year than we did last year, where we tried to avoid, the 2023 cut. And it's based upon the data that's out there, that 25% margin that I mentioned earlier, and instead focuses around, that the money is going to patient care. But what we need to do is to not destroy the bridge that's currently there operating between traditional Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, and other programs in terms of delivering home care services. But we need to take that bridge opportunity and find more permanent fixes, both within the home health benefit, but also within those other payers who are not paying their fair share. It's pretty clear that Medicaid and Medicare Advantage is getting the same high quality home health services, but they're getting it at 20% or more, less than the traditional Medicare program is paying for. We can't sustain operations with that kind of an approach, so we're changing our approach to it while saying in the near term, we can't cut rates. We can't do the temporary or permanent adjustments that are, in the mix at this point in time, and that whatever it is, has to at least maintain the status quo until we could find alternative remedies. This is a time to look past budget neutral PDGM transformation into a broader based set of remedies that look at home health care as a whole economic model, not just looking at the silo of Medicare fee for service. If we don't, we will continually have every single year these kinds of fights.
Yeah, it's obviously we as an industry have done a better job than what we did prior in getting advocacy out there. I mean, and I say this all the time, and Bill will echo the same comments. When you see the emails that say click to make sure your legislators know your opinions on it, it really does matter. It's not just clicking and sending an email. The staffers in those, with both members of the House and the Senate, they know exactly how many people are sending in those emails and the detailed comments on each issue. And the more they think that may affect them getting reelected, the more voice we will have as a collective group with them to make sure that we have the benefits that we need for the patients we serve.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And one of the first things we expect to see on PDGM is Senator Stabenow calling for a hearing or an investigation to take a deeper dive look at PDGM, included within that the broader look as well. Can we validate, and I know it will happen, can we validate that these other government payers are being subsidized by the traditional Medicare program? And can we further then validate what we believe to be the case? If you mess with the traditional Medicare program without solving those others, it creates jeopardy on risk on access to care for all patients, not just the Medicare, traditional or Medicare Advantage or Medicaid patients.
This is an area that we talked a lot about a year ago, the SNF at home programs, and that benefit that we thought had a 50-50 chance of passing. Where does that stand? Is there much movement there?
Well, it's going to have to be reintroduced into legislation because everything from the last Congress is now off the books on a going forward basis. And Senator Stabenow, who was our lead sponsor, along with Senator Susan Collins and many others, and then the House of Representatives as well on this, they want to move forward with it. We do need to do some work around it. What surfaced as the main problem was the reimbursement model was tied to the volume of personal care services that were given to the patient, and the higher level of service, the more money that would go to the patient. And that finds itself butting up against, well, what's the traditional Medicare benefit supposed to pay for on such things as home health aid services or personal care? Where's the line drawn before it goes over to the SNF at home side of it? So there's continuing interest, but we need to evolve the actual benefit structure in order for it to have traction going forward. We at NAHC are absolutely committed to this. It is a modernization that's way overdue in the program.
So when you think about deal making with these rate cuts, what is your view of, like, I mean, we've seen merger and acquisition slow. We've seen number of providers decrease. So some of that's related to merger and acquisition, some of that's related to closures. What's your view on where that stands and how the House and the Senate see those things? I mean, right now, I guess from my view, until they see what I'll call a area desert where there's no providers, it's probably not going to become an issue to them. But what are your thoughts there?
Well, and MedPAC helps fuel some of their understanding of it, and we need to clarify it. I mean, MedPAC's report, showing that there are at least 2 home health agencies in every zip code. But when a zip code comprises 25,000 square miles in Montana, they could be available to 5 square miles of patients at that point. So we need to get that taken care of. We are also seeing some things that need to be addressed. Places like California have had a surge in the number of home health agencies, as well as even a double that for hospices in just, mainly the LA area. So we're not seeing deserts in certain areas there. Those are raising some program integrity concerns. But to give it some kind of quantitative context, we still have over 11,000 home health agencies operating across the country, when we were down to 6,400 back in the year 2000. And so there's been a net growth that is quite significant. And when you're dealing with members of Congress and even regulators, it's hard to get them to go below a surface level assessment. So, we are going to get a handle. We're going to continue to describe where those deserts are today. And they're clearly emerging, particularly, as you said, in rural areas. But we're very concerned about the disparity side of healthcare too. There are parts of metropolitan areas where we have very difficult time accessing services, and that may be, safety based, or they may be in other ways affecting low income people more than they are everybody else. So I think you're right, though, that Congress in particular does not seem to rise to the challenge until it reaches a crisis proportion, and that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We need to get to it before it gets to that crisis, because ultimately, I mean, when I looked at numbers, I know, Bill, you and I have talked about this, of the 11,000 providers that existed. I mean, the numbers I had were there was less than about 8,600 that actually submitted claims in the first quarter of 2022.
And so that's actually an area we've asked CMS to focus in on. There should not be a provider that has no services being provided still having a Medicare participation agreement. Not only misleads the Congress and regulators, it's not the way to run the Medicare program. And we've called for that approach, and most recently called on the Medicare Payment Advisor Commission to revise their data analysis too, because they're looking at participation agreements, not actually providers who are delivering care.
Right. And there are some states where you need to have a Medicare license in order to provide Medicaid services. So there are some reasons for it. But to me, there's just a backlog of people that have either decommissioned or not going through that process that is affecting some of the legislators and what they're doing. What advice would you give the listeners here for as they head to 2023 and beyond? What do you feel is the most important areas? And we've hit a lot of them, but if you had to summarize for the group, what would you think?
Well, you offered one, be engaged in terms of the advocacy side of it, engaged otherwise, in terms of education, be engaged with your own staff in terms of mentorship. The other item, and I have said this many, many times about keeping your eye on the road, while also allocating some of your great energies and intellect to the future, because sometimes the world can pass you by if you don't. That doesn't mean you want to run a red light in order to get to the future, but you also want to make sure that you know what's on the other side of that red light and be there to have effect on it as well. The last thing to mention may be less practical than that, but it is recognize yourself in all of this and the values that you bring into the delivery of healthcare services out there, because that will give you the confidence to know that you will move forward, you will be making gains despite any of the challenges that are out there. And then the last one I'll offer, Mike, and this will sound like it's way too more of a repeat. Don't assume what you're doing is right. Re-examine it, including documentation. Because we all know what happens too often when you assume.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a couple of things as we close out here as well. It's really important for you to look inward into your organizations and determining what you're doing really well and what you may not be doing as well. I mean, you think about the scenarios. If we're in a workforce shortage, which we know we're in and we're going to be in, if there are certain programs where you're delivering superior clinical outcomes and you have financial implications, financials that are producing well, double down on those. And if you have other ones that you may be doing because it's important to the community, or you're part of a health system and you're taking patients because you need to, if you're not seeing every patient that you can today, and you're seeing patients you have programs that are just not as you're not stacking up in the communities or in the competition, you may need to look at it becoming smaller to become larger. I mean, it's something that, especially if you're a not-for-profit, you always talk. We talk about mission, and I've been in the CFO role at not-for-profits and prior. The mission can't function without the dollars that are there. I'm talking about just double down and do things where you're doing it very, very well, and just expanding that and potentially cutting service areas that if it helps your organization overall, you may need to look at that differently than you did 3 to 5 years ago.
I want to thank you guys at Netsmart. You've been great partners with us at NAHC and McBee as well, to credit McBee Associates for this and your great team you have at McBee. And this is the other part of it, as I'll offer my last final lesson learned kind of a thing. Netsmart, McBee Associates are as much involved and essential to the provision of healthcare services at home as are all of the people who are actually delivering the care. Business partners with them. That sounds like a promo for you guys. Well, no, it's giving you credit where credit's due.
Thank you, Bill. You appreciate Bill joining and great insight today. Thank you, everyone.
At Netsmart, we understand the challenges facing provider organizations. Our team will help you navigate changing value-based care models with solutions and services that make person-centered care a reality. We'll equip you with technology and services that provide holistic, real-time views of care histories that inform better decision-making and better outcomes. Visit us today at ntst.com. Netsmart, serving you so you can serve others. Thanks for listening to the Netsmart Care Threads podcast. Through collaboration and conversation, we can work together to make healthcare more connected than ever before and better support the communities we serve. To ensure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you use Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to give us a quick rating for the show. Just tap the number of stars that you think the podcast deserves. Until next time.